Greetings. Today we are going to be talking about adverbs, okay? So before we even get into that, we need to know what an adverb is, right? So an adverb is a word that describes the actions of verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. So it's important to note that an adverb is talking about one word, because sometimes you may have a group of words that can function like an adverb, and we will call those adverbial phrases. When you have a group of words functioning like an adverb, okay? But we're talking about adverbs, not adverbial phrases. Adverbs. So an adverb is going to be one word, okay? So they describe the actions of verbs. So they are not just going to give information about any verb, right? So these are going to be used with action verbs, right? And adjectives and other adverbs would be the two other parts of speech that can be modified by an adverb, right? So when we say describe or modify, we simply mean provide more information about these parts of speech, right? So, yes, generally in English we have five types of adverbs, generally, right? And we're going to do the first one right here, which is adverbs of manner, right? So an adverb of manner responds to the question of how, right? So an adverb of manner tells us how an action occurs. In other words, it describes the way in which the action is performed. Right. Manner, right? So this is a type of adverb that tells us how an action is performed, the way in which it was carried out or is carried out, right? So that's what we call an adverb of manner. So let's look at some features. So many adverbs of manner will end in the suffix ly. Now, I said many and not all because there are words that end in ly that are not adverbs of manner. For example, if I say Susan is friendly, friendly ends in ly, but is friendly an adverb? No, friendly is an adjective describing Susan. So you have to bear that in mind. Just because a word ends in ly doesn't necessarily mean that it is an adverb of manner or an adverb period, right? Next feature, these can occur before and after the verb, right? So in terms of placement, they can either go before the verb or after the verb, but we'll get to that shortly, right? And these are some examples of adverbs of manner. Quickly, slowly, lazily. Notice they all end in ly, right? Right, just as I said, many will end in ly, right? So let's look at some examples, some sample sentences, right? So the dog viciously attacked the robber. Our adverb of manner here would be viciously because it describes how the dog attacked the robber. So viciously is describing attacked, which is a verb, right? 2. The maid folded the clothes neatly. Neatly is our adverb of manner, and neatly is describing folded. It is describing how the maid folded the clothes, right? So, yeah. And 3, teachers work tirelessly throughout the term, right? Our adverb of manner here is tirelessly because tirelessly describes how the teachers work, the manner in which they work, tirelessly, meaning that with a lot of effort and non-stop, right? So that is our adverb of manner here. And you would notice that in the first example, viciously precedes the verb, and in 2 and 3, the adverb of manner comes after the verb. It follows the verb. So this is an example of why these types of adverbs can go either before the verb or after the verb. depending on the context, okay? So the context is going to be important because for number 2, I could say, the maid neatly folded the clothes. You could say that, right? As well as saying the maid folded the clothes neatly. But you can't say the teacher tirelessly worked throughout the term. That would sound funny, right? Or the dog attacked viciously the robber. No. So it really depends on the context, right? But generally, they can be used both before and after the verb, okay? So any word that describes how an action is performed will be an adverb of manner. And another thing, remember I said that many of them will end in ly, but there are also adverbs of manner that do not end in ly, right? So let's look at the word well, right? You know, well could be adjective too, but we are talking about it in the context of being an adverb. If I say, she performed well last night, well is modifying performed because it describes how she performed. Well means in a satisfactory fashion. So well is an adverb of manner. Okay? So I use that example to illustrate to you that any word which describes how an action is performed is going to be an adverb of manner. Okay? So this is the first type of adverb that will be, this is the first type of adverb, right, that we have. Now we're going to proceed to adverbs of time. Okay, so we move on to adverbs of time. And an adverb of time responds to the question of when. So when did the action take place, or when does the action take place, okay? So an adverb of time tells us when an action occurs, right? Of course, the tense wouldn't matter, but we put it in the present just for the definition, right? Let's look at some features. These are usually placed at the beginning or end of a sentence. When the time is important, it will be placed at the beginning. So what this is saying is when we want to place emphasis on time, we will put it at the beginning, right? But when you put it at the end, it's more neutral or what have you, right? But when you put it at the beginning, it is used for emphasis, right? So examples include later, soon, and tomorrow. So these are adverbs of time, examples, right? So let's look at some sentences now. Number 1, come now. Right? So this is an affirmative command, of course. And our adverb of time would be now, because it responds to the question of when. So when to come? No. Okay? 2, the accident happened yesterday. Yesterday is our adverb of time, and it is telling us when the accident happened. Right? So when did the accident happen? Yesterday. And 3, recently she has changed. Now this is an example of how the adverb of time can be placed at the beginning or at the end, because I could also say she has changed recently, right? But because I put it at the beginning, this adds, so this is for emphasis. I'm emphasizing that recently she has changed. Okay, so obviously recently is our adverb of time, and it responds to the question of when has she changed. So when has she changed? Recently. Okay, so any word that tells us when an action occurs is going to be an adverb of time. Okay, so these are adverbs of time. Now let's proceed to adverbs of frequency. Adverbs of frequency. So an adverb of frequency is going to respond to the question of how often. So how often an action is performed. So an adverb of frequency tells us how often an action is performed. Let's look at some features. So it will, in terms of placement, it will usually occur directly before the main verb of the sentence. However, if there is an auxiliary verb, it will occur after the auxiliary verb. So an auxiliary verb would be what we would call a helping verb. So when you have a sentence where there are two verbs, you're going to have an auxiliary verb and you're going to have a main verb. Okay? So for tenses like the perfect tense, where you have the verb to have plus the past participle, like I have done. So in a sentence like, so let's give you an example. In a sentence like I have done my homework, we have two verbs. We have and we have done. Okay? So that's an example of the present perfect, right? So you have the present tense of the verb to have, I have, and then you have the past participle of do, which is done. So those are two verbs. So that would be so to have would be a helping verb, right? And our main verb would be done, right? But it's in the past participle. So for tenses like that, we will call these compound tenses, right? You will need more than one verb, okay? And so when you hear the term auxiliary verb, that's what it means. It means a helping verb, okay? So examples of adverbs of time include sometimes, seldom, and occasionally. Of course, these all respond to the question of how often, right? So examples, sample sentences. I occasionally smoke. Okay, so occasionally is an adverb of time and it's telling us how often I smoke. I don't smoke at all, but you know. Right. And remember, usually they'll go before. So you wouldn't say I smoke occasionally. No, that we would more put it at directly before the verb, right? So I occasionally smoke. 2, we always watch the Oscars. Okay, always tells us how often we watch the Oscars, right? And it would be, it is very unlikely that someone doesn't know what the Oscars, what the Oscars would be, because that's like the biggest thing when it comes to film, right? So yeah, we always watch the Oscars. So as you see again, always goes before the verb. We wouldn't say we watch always the Oscars. No, we wouldn't say that. We would not say that. And 3, my father has never eaten ice cream, right? So this now illustrates the point about the adverb of frequency following the auxiliary verb. So here we have again an example of the perfect tense, the present perfect, and we have has, and then we have eaten. So you see that the never follows the auxiliary verb, right? So yes, when you have an auxiliary verb, the adverb of frequency is going to go after it. So my father has never eaten ice cream. Okay, so how often does your father eat ice cream? In fact, he has never eaten ice cream. So never is our adverb of frequency. Okay, so any word that tells us how often an action is performed will be an adverb of frequency, right? So yes, so now we're going to go on to another type of adverb, and that would be an adverb of place. Okay, so adverbs of place, and these respond to the question of where, right? So an adverb of place tells us where an action takes place. So features, it is usually placed after the main verb, object, or at the end of the sentence. So these are the places in which the adverb of place is placed, right? So after the main verb, object, or at the end of the sentence. So basically at the end, right? So some examples would include below, outside, and there. And it is worth mentioning that these three words can actually be other parts of speech, right? But of course, in specific context, they can be adverbs. But that's in a whole other video, right? So, sample sentences. Crime happens everywhere. Where does crime happen? Everywhere. So everywhere is describing happens, of course, because that's our that is our verb, right? 2, we have an affirmative command. Come here. Where? Here. So here is modifying come, the verb, right? So yes, that's telling us where to come, right? 3, his house can be found nearby. Where can his house be found? Nearby. So nearby is modifying found. Well, find. This is one of those structures where you have more than one verb, right? But can be found. Nearby. So all 3 of these are verbs, right? But nearby tells us where the house can be found, right? So that is an adverb of place. Nearby can actually be an adjective as well, but obviously in this case it would be an adverb, right? So any word that is going to tell us where an action takes place, it is going to be an adverb of place, right? So yes, these are adverbs of place, and we'll proceed now to the final adverb that we'll cover today, which is an adverb of degree. Alright, so we move on to the 5th type of adverb, and this would be an adverb of degree. And adverbs of degree are going to answer the question of to what extent or how much, okay? So an adverb of degree describes the level or intensity of a verb, an adjective, or another adverb, right? So it describes the level or intensity, right? So in terms of placement, these are going to go before the verb, adjective, or adverb that they modify. That's the first feature. That's the place that they will appear in the sentence, right? Some examples would be almost, to, and extremely, right? So as you see, these respond to the question of like how much or to what extent, as you will see with the examples that I'm about to go through, right? So 1, I am very cold. Our adverb of degree will be very, right? And that will respond to the question of to what extent, right? Because very is adding intensity to cold, which is an adjective, right? So you see it comes before, right? So very is intensifying cold. So why can't I just say I am cold? No. But you can also say how much as well, because when you say I am cold, how cold are you? Very cold, right? So the adverb here is an intensifier, right? It intensifies or modifies cold, right? Adding a layer of intensity to it, right? So how cold are you? Very cold, right? 2, Rihanna performed rather well last night. So our adverb of degree is going to be rather, and rather again adds it adds a little bit of a little amount to well, and in this case well is an adverb, because previously we would have come across this in one of the examples they would have given for adverbs of manner. So well is an adverb of manner because well is telling us how Rihanna performed, but rather is adding a bit, it's like adding like a little bit is adding a small amount to well, right? So how did she perform? Rather well. Not just well, right? So well would be an adverb of manner, like it's saying how she performed, but rather well. So this is an example of an adverb of degree modifying an adverb, right? So this is an example here, number one, of an adverb modifying an adjective. And here we have an adverb modifying another adverb, right? So how did she perform? Rather well. And once again, rather is adding a little bit of an amount, right? Or right, because rather means like to a certain extent, right? So yeah. 3, our teacher really enjoyed our presentation. Our adverb of degree will be really, and really is again adding intensity to enjoyed, which is a verb, right? So she really enjoyed it, and she did not just enjoy it, but she really enjoyed it. So it's adding intensity, right? And you could say, you could ask the question, how much did she enjoy, or to what extent did she enjoy our presentation? She really enjoyed our presentation, right? So these are adverbs of degree. They're going to describe the level or intensity of a verb, adjective, or another adverb. And you see right here, you have an adverb modifying adverb of degree, right? Modifying an adjective. Here you have the adverb of degree modifying an adverb, and you have here an adverb of degree modifying a verb, right? So yes, these are generally the 5 types of adverbs in English. And now we're going to end off with a quiz. All right, so we come to the quiz now. So identify the adverbs in sentences and state the type of adverb. So you have to identify the adverb and state what type of adverb it is, right? So number 1, I am going to the bank today. So our adverb here would be today. And what type of adverb would that be? So which question would it respond to? That will respond to when, right? So today is an adverb of time. So it's respond to the question of when. So when am I going to the bank? Today. And today will be modifying going, right? So this is the present continuous. So you have 2 verbs, right? But today is modifying the action of going to the bank. Okay, so that's an adverb of time. 2, she is rather attractive. So our adverb here would be rather. And rather is adding an amount to the attractiveness, adding a small amount to the attractiveness, right? So yeah, so she's attractive to an extent, or to a greater extent, right? So rather would therefore be an adverb of degree. 3, hurricanes rarely occur here. So we have 2 adverbs. We have rarely and we have here. Rarely is going to respond to the question of how often, right? So rarely is going to be an adverb of frequency, right? Whereas here is going to respond to where. So where do hurricanes occur? Here. So here would be an example of an adverb of place, right? 4, the students waited anxiously for their results. Okay, so our adverb is anxiously, Anxiously describes the way in which they waited, meaning that they were acting in a very anxious way, in a very anxious manner. So that responds to the question of how. And anxiously would be modifying waited. So anxiously would be an example of an adverb of manner. And of course it ends in a way, conveniently, right? And number 5, she always won the game. Always would be our adverb, and always modifies won, right? So always responds to the question of how often, right? So how often did she win the game? Always. So always is an example of an adverb of frequency. How often, right? All right, so this is the end, right? I trust that you were listening attentively. I hope that this lecture was helpful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.